Every story eventually reaches a moment where people stop asking what happened and start asking who is going to step up. The Whittaker story has reached that moment. For years, people have watched from a distance. Some felt sympathy. Some offered help. Others argued about whether filming the family was exploitation or awareness. But tonight, a different question is beginning to surface. If things really went wrong, who fixes it? Because right now, the conversation around the Whittakers is no longer just about videos or viral moments. It's about responsibility. Responsibility for money. Responsibility for care. Responsibility for truth. And the deeper people dig into this story, the clearer something becomes. There has never been a single person truly in charge. Not legally, not consistently, not transparently. Instead, there have been waves of individuals stepping forward, claiming they were helping. Some documented their efforts publicly. Some raised money. Some filmed updates. Some argued with each other online about who was doing the right thing. But the Whittakers themselves, the people at the center of it all, rarely had control over any of that. They became the subject, not the decision-makers. And that dynamic is where many of the current tensions began. Because once money enters a story involving vulnerable adults, oversight becomes essential. Without oversight, help can turn into chaos. And chaos is exactly what many people now believe happened. Different personalities entered the picture over time. Different people claimed they were working for the family. Different narratives emerged about who was trustworthy and who was not. At times, it almost felt like multiple groups were competing to steer the Whittaker story in different directions. One group insisted they were protecting the family. Another group claimed others were exploiting them. A third group insisted everyone was doing the best they could. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise were the Whittakers themselves, still living their lives in odd, largely unaware of the storms swirling around them. But storms eventually reach shore. And when they do, the damage becomes visible. Questions start appearing that were never asked before. Why weren't certain medical issues addressed sooner? Who actually controlled the money that was raised? Were contracts signed? If they were signed, did everyone understand what those contracts meant? These are no longer just internet debates. They are serious questions about care and accountability. One of the most emotional examples involves Lorraine, Timmy's mother. People who have watched recent clips notice something subtle but powerful. When Timmy was leaving to spend time with someone outside the family, Lorraine didn't say much. But silence can speak volumes. She didn't appear angry. She didn't appear aggressive. But she also didn't appear comfortable. And that reaction has led many viewers to ask an uncomfortable question. Was Lorraine being protective? Or was she simply unsure what was happening around her? Remember, Lorraine has lived most of her life within the same tight family environment. She watched Timmy grow up. She cared for him. She lived beside him every day. For someone in that position, seeing their child leave with someone else, especially someone new, could be unsettling. Not necessarily because they fear harm, but because they are unfamiliar with change. And for families that have lived in isolation for generations, change can feel overwhelming. That doesn't automatically mean wrongdoing occurred, but it does highlight something important. Trust was fragile, and when trust is fragile, misunderstandings grow quickly. At the same time, other controversies were unfolding. Different online figures began arguing about who was truly helping the Whittakers. Some accused others of chasing attention. Some accused others of profiting from the family's story. And some began forming groups and organizations claiming they wanted to save the Whittakers. One of those efforts reportedly included something called the Sunny Rose Foundation. Supporters claimed it was meant to advocate for the family. Critics claimed it was just another attempt to control the narrative. Whether those criticisms are fair or not, the existence of these competing voices reveals something deeper. Everyone wants to be the hero, but heroes require responsibility. And responsibility requires transparency. Without transparency, even good intentions become questionable. Now another development is adding tension to the situation. Legal cases, allegations, felony charges connected to individuals who were involved with the Whittakers. Those legal matters are still unfolding, and no final outcomes have been reached. But the presence of court proceedings changes the atmosphere completely. Because once courts become involved, the conversation moves from opinion to evidence. And when evidence enters the story, narratives shift. People who once argued emotionally must now confront documentation. Bank records, contracts, statements, witness accounts. That transition is happening right now. And it raises the question that many viewers are starting to ask. If everyone involved claims they were helping, why did things become so complicated? Sometimes the answer is simple. Too many voices, too many promises, too many people trying to guide a family that needed stability more than anything else. Now the focus is shifting again, not toward blame, but toward the future. Because regardless of what happened in the past, the Whittakers still exist. They still need care. They still need support. And they still deserve dignity. Which brings us back to the question that's starting to echo louder every day. Someone needs to step forward. Not to argue, not to film, not to profit, but to ensure the family's future is protected. So who has the courage to do that? Once money enters a story like this, everything changes. What begins as curiosity or compassion can slowly transform into something much more complicated. Because money creates questions. Who controls it? Who distributes it? Who decides what it's used for? And in the case of the Whittaker family, those questions have become central to the entire controversy. Over the years, the Whittakers became widely known after their story was shared publicly by Mark Laita. His videos introduced millions of viewers to a family living quietly in a small Appalachian community where poverty and isolation had shaped generations of lives. The videos triggered a massive response. People were moved. Some viewers felt sympathy and wanted to help. Others felt uncomfortable and accused the project of turning a struggling family into a spectacle. But regardless of opinion, one thing was undeniable. Attention created opportunity. Donations began flowing. Supporters sent money. Fundraisers appeared. People wanted to help the family improve their living conditions. And for a while, that support seemed to produce real results. Repairs were made. Living conditions improved. Basic needs were addressed. But as the years went on, new figures began entering the picture. Different individuals began visiting the Whittakers. Some filmed content. Some posted updates. Some claimed they were working directly with the family to improve their lives. And with each new person who arrived, the question of financial control became more complicated. Because whenever money is raised in the name of vulnerable individuals, someone has to manage it. Someone has to decide how much money was raised, where that money goes, who has authority to spend it. And in the Whittaker situation, there was never a clear, universally accepted answer to those questions. That vacuum created suspicion. Some observers believed the people involved were genuinely trying to help. Others believed some of those same individuals were motivated by attention, monetization, or influence. And when conflicting stories began appearing online, the divide only grew deeper. One of the biggest points of controversy involves alleged contracts. Some reports claim that written agreements existed between individuals creating online content and members of the Whittaker family. These agreements reportedly described how revenue generated from videos or social media platforms would be shared. But the exact details of those agreements remain unclear to the public. Who signed them? Did the Whittakers fully understand them? Were independent advisors involved? These are serious questions because contracts involving vulnerable adults require careful scrutiny. If a contract was signed but the individual signing it did not fully understand its meaning, courts may question whether that agreement is legally enforceable. On the other hand, if the contract was properly explained and voluntarily accepted, then it becomes a legitimate legal document that both sides are expected to honor. This uncertainty has fueled ongoing accusations. Some critics claim that the Whittakers were promised a share of online revenue but received only a small portion of the money generated by their story. Others argue that expenses, travel costs, production work, and other factors complicate the financial picture and that accusations of wrongdoing are premature. Without access to verified financial records, it is impossible for the public to know the full truth. And that uncertainty feeds speculation. Now another element has added tension to the situation. Legal charges. Certain individuals connected to the Whittaker story have recently faced felony allegations related to financial conduct. These cases are still working their way through the legal system, and no verdict has been reached. But their existence has intensified scrutiny, because when prosecutors bring charges, it signals that investigators believe there may be evidence of wrongdoing. Still, the legal system operates on a fundamental principle. Charges are not convictions. Anyone accused of a crime remains legally innocent until proven guilty in court. That process can take months or even years. Evidence must be examined. Witnesses must testify. Defense attorneys must challenge accusations. Until that process is complete, the full truth remains unknown. But the existence of legal proceedings has changed the tone of the conversation surrounding the Whittakers. The story is no longer just about compassion or curiosity. It has become a case study in what happens when internet fame intersects with vulnerable individuals. And the stakes are higher now, because the Whittakers themselves remain at the center of it all. They did not build social media channels. They did not design fundraising campaigns. They did not create monetization strategies. They became subjects of those efforts. And that raises a difficult ethical question. When a vulnerable family becomes the focus of viral attention, who has the authority to manage the support that follows? Some argue that the original documentarian should maintain oversight. Others argue that local advocates or organizations should step in. Others believe that no single individual should control the narrative of finances at all. Instead, they say oversight should come from neutral third parties, social workers, legal guardians, court-appointed advocates. This debate is far from resolved, and it has created an environment where multiple voices claim to represent the best interests of the Whittakers. But representation requires accountability. Anyone claiming to help vulnerable individuals must be willing to show transparency. That means documenting where funds go, explaining decisions, accepting oversight. Because without that transparency, even genuine acts of generosity can appear questionable. And perception matters. Right now, many observers feel that the Whittaker story has drifted away from the original goal of helping a struggling family. Instead, it has become tangled in arguments about who deserves credit, who deserves blame, and who should be trusted moving forward. But while people debate online, the family itself continues living their lives, now largely outside the public spotlight. Their daily routines have changed, their circumstances have changed, and the network of people surrounding them has changed. Which brings us back to the central question again. If the past few years have proven anything, it's that too many competing voices can create confusion rather than clarity. And when confusion surrounds vulnerable people, someone eventually needs to bring stability back into the situation. That stability may come through legal rulings. It may come through court-appointed guardianship. Or it may come through individuals who are willing to step forward and help without seeking attention or control. In the middle of all the arguments, contracts, accusations, and online debates, there is a moment that keeps resurfacing. It's quiet, almost easy to miss. But for many people watching closely, it says more than any headline. The moment involves Lorraine, Timmy's mother. In one short clip that circulated online, someone can be heard telling Lorraine that Timmy is going to leave for the day, to go fishing, to swing somewhere, to spend time away from the house. The person speaking sounds casual, friendly, like it's a normal outing. But Lorraine's reaction is different. She doesn't argue. She doesn't shout. She doesn't confront anyone. She simply stays quiet. And for many viewers, that silence raised an important question. Was Lorraine uncomfortable, or was she simply unsure what to say? To understand why that moment matters, you have to remember who Lorraine is. Lorraine has lived most of her life in the same place, the same house, the same family environment and odd. Her world has always been small. Her routine has always been familiar. Her family, especially her son, has always been close. Timmy didn't grow up leaving home often. He went to school when he was younger. He occasionally attended church. But for the most part, his life was centered around the family home. That kind of routine creates deep attachment, not just emotionally, but psychologically. For Lorraine, Timmy wasn't just her son. He was part of the structure of her daily life. So when someone arrives and suddenly begins taking Timmy places, even if the intentions are positive, that change can feel unsettling. It doesn't mean Lorraine believes something bad will happen, but it may mean she feels uncertain. Imagine spending decades caring for someone. Then one day strangers arrive and begin making plans for that person. Even if those plans are meant to help, the sudden shift can feel confusing, especially for someone who may struggle with communication. And that's an important detail. Lorraine does speak, but not always in ways outsiders easily understand. People who have lived around the family for years say she communicates best with those who know her well. She may speak more freely with relatives like Larry, or with people she trusts. But when unfamiliar people are present, she can become quieter, more cautious. So when viewers saw that moment, when Timmy was leaving and Lorraine didn't respond, some interpreted it as fear. Others interpreted it as discomfort. But another possibility exists. She simply didn't know what to say, because the world around her had suddenly changed. For decades, the Whittakers lived quietly, largely unnoticed by the outside world. Then everything shifted. After their story was shared publicly by Mark Laita, attention poured in. Millions of people watched videos about the family. Strangers traveled to see them. Donations arrived. Journalists asked questions. Visitors came and went. And with that attention came new relationships. Some people arrived offering help. Others arrived offering opportunities. Some simply wanted to meet the family they had seen online. But for someone like Lorraine, that sudden exposure must have been overwhelming. One day life was quiet. The next day strangers were arriving with cameras. Strangers were offering rides. Strangers were talking about money. Strangers were talking about contracts. And Lorraine was still living in the same house she had always known, trying to understand a world that had changed around her. This is why many observers now say the real issue may not be exploitation alone. It may be confusion. Too many people stepping in at once. Too many voices telling the family what should happen next. Too many promises being made without a clear structure behind them. Because when vulnerable individuals are surrounded by competing influences, clarity disappears. One person says they are helping. Another says they are protecting. A third says someone else is lying. And in the middle of it all, the family struggles to understand what is actually happening. Lorraine's quiet reaction in that short video may represent something deeper than one moment. It may represent the entire experience the Whittakers have gone through over the past few years. A life that once felt predictable suddenly filled with unfamiliar faces, unfamiliar conversations, and unfamiliar decisions. And that leads to an uncomfortable question. Did anyone ever stop to ask Lorraine what she wanted? Not what viewers wanted, Not what content creators wanted, not what donors wanted, what Lorraine wanted. Because for all the attention surrounding the Whittaker story, the voices of the family themselves have rarely been the loudest ones. Instead, the loudest voices have often been those interpreting the situation for them. And that dynamic can create problems. Even well-meaning people can unintentionally push vulnerable individuals into situations they don't fully understand. That's why legal systems exist. Courts, guardians, protective services, not to punish people for trying to help, but to ensure that vulnerable individuals are protected when decisions become complicated. Right now, many aspects of the Whittaker story are moving into that legal territory. Investigations, court hearings, legal questions about money and contracts. Those processes are slow, but they exist for a reason. Because when a story grows this large, when money, influence, and vulnerability intersect, the only way to restore clarity is through documentation and oversight. Still, the emotional side of the story remains powerful. People feel connected to the Whittakers. They worry about Timmy. They worry about Lorraine. They worry about whether the family will ever return to the stability they once had. But emotional concern alone cannot solve the problem. What the family needs now is something far less dramatic. Consistency, protection, and people willing to help without turning the situation into a spectacle. That is easier said than done. Because by now, the Whittaker story has attracted far more attention than anyone originally imagined. And attention always attracts competing agendas, which leads to the next challenge. If someone truly wants to save the Whittakers, to protect their future and restore stability, that person will have to step forward with something stronger than good intentions. They will need transparency. They will need legal structure. And they will need the courage to place the family's well-being above every other motive. When a story becomes this public, something predictable happens. People begin forming sides, not just opinions, sides. And once sides form, the focus slowly shifts away from the original issue. Instead of asking what is best for the Whittakers, people start asking who should be in charge of helping them. That shift has become very visible in recent months. Several individuals and groups have stepped forward claiming they want to protect the Whittaker family. Some say they are advocates. Some say they are investigators. Some say they are trying to expose wrongdoing. Others say they are simply supporters who care deeply about the family's future. But the result of all these competing voices has been something unexpected. More confusion. Because when 10 people claim they are saving someone, it becomes very difficult to determine who actually has the authority to act. One example involves online groups and foundations that have formed around the Whittaker story. Some supporters created pages dedicated to protecting the family and raising awareness. One such group reportedly operated under the name Sunny Rose Foundation. Supporters said its purpose was to advocate for the Whittakers and make sure they were treated fairly. Critics said something very different. They argued that organizations like that risked interfering with legal processes already underway. They worried that too many outside voices could make an already delicate situation worse. And that tension highlights one of the biggest problems surrounding the Whittaker story. Everyone wants to help. But not everyone agrees on what help actually looks like. Some people believe the family should return to the quiet life they once had. They argue that too much public attention has already caused enough disruption. Others believe the opposite. They argue that public attention is the only reason the family received help in the first place. Without visibility, they say, the Whittakers might still be living in extremely difficult conditions without any outside assistance. Both perspectives contain truth. Public attention did bring support, but public attention also brought chaos. Because once millions of people begin watching a family's life online, the number of people who feel entitled to intervene grows rapidly. Some interventions come from kindness. Others come from curiosity, and some come from people who simply want to become part of a viral story. That's why experts often warn that vulnerable individuals should not become the center of uncontrolled public attention. Without structure, the situation becomes unstable. And instability is exactly what many observers now see surrounding the Whittakers. Different content creators have argued with each other about who is trustworthy. Different advocates accuse others of spreading misinformation. Some people claim they were blocked from discussion groups. Others say their attempts to investigate were shut down. These arguments can become intense. Sometimes they include accusations, insults, and personal attacks. But beneath all of that noise lies a more serious issue. The family itself cannot control these battles. They did not create these online communities. They did not organize these debates. They did not authorize strangers to argue about their future. Yet their lives are the subject of every argument. This dynamic can create a dangerous illusion. It makes it seem like helping the Whittakers requires winning an online fight. But real help rarely works that way. Real help usually happens quietly. Through social services, through medical care, through legal protection, through people who focus on the family's needs rather than their own platforms. That's why many observers believe the most important decisions about the Whittakers' future will not be made on social media. They will be made through official channels, courts, protective services, guardianship hearings, legal oversight. Those processes are far less dramatic than online arguments, but they exist for a reason. They create structure, they create accountability, and they ensure that decisions affecting vulnerable individuals are made carefully. Still, the emotional investment people feel in the Whittaker story is understandable. Millions of viewers have watched videos about the family for years. They feel like they know Timmy. They feel like they know Lorraine. They feel protective of them. And when people feel protective, they want to take action. But action without coordination can sometimes create more problems than solutions. If 10 different people attempt to save the same family in 10 different ways, the result may be chaos instead of stability. That is the situation many believe has unfolded over the past year. Too many competing plans, too many conflicting voices, too many attempts to steer the narrative, and not enough unified direction. So the question becomes even more important now. Who should actually guide the Whittakers' future? Should it be individuals who have built relationships with the family over time? Should it be local advocates who understand the community in odd? Should it be state agencies responsible for protecting vulnerable adults? Or should it be a combination of all those groups working together under clear legal supervision? That decision may ultimately be made by courts rather than the internet. Because once legal proceedings begin, judges often determine who has the authority to act on behalf of vulnerable individuals. Guardianship appointments, supervised visitation, financial oversight. These are the tools courts use to restore stability when a situation becomes complicated. And right now, stability is exactly what the Whittaker story needs. The endless debates about who is right and who is wrong may continue online. But the family's future will depend on something far more practical. Structure, protection, consistency, and people willing to step back when necessary so the right systems can do their job. Which brings us to the final question in this story. If someone truly wants to save the Whittakers, they may need to do something very different from what we have seen so far. They may need to stop competing for influence and instead focus on rebuilding trust around a family that has experienced far more attention than anyone ever expected. Every story like this eventually forces people to face a difficult truth. Helping someone is not the same thing as controlling their story, and the Whittaker story may be one of the clearest examples of that difference. For years, millions of people have watched the lives of this family from afar. What began as a quiet portrait of a rural Appalachian household eventually turned into something much larger, something complicated, emotional, and at times deeply controversial. At the center of it all are real people. Timmy, Lorraine, the remaining members of the Whittaker family who lived for decades in relative obscurity and odd before the outside world suddenly arrived. When their story was first shared publicly by Mark Laita, many viewers reacted with compassion. They wanted to help improve the family's living conditions. They wanted to support people who had clearly faced enormous challenges. And for a time, that attention produced positive results. The family received donations. Their home was improved. Basic comforts were added that had been missing for years. But attention rarely remains simple. Once a story becomes viral, it begins attracting new participants, people who see opportunities, people who want to contribute, and sometimes people who simply want to become part of the narrative. Over time, the Whittaker story grew beyond a single documentary project. New personalities entered the picture. New content appeared online. Different voices began claiming they understood what was best for the family. Some individuals truly believed they were helping. Others were accused of chasing attention. And eventually the situation became something almost impossible to control. Competing narratives, conflicting accusations, arguments about money, contracts, and influence. Through all of that noise, one reality never changed. The Whittakers themselves remained vulnerable. They were never social media strategists. They were never legal negotiators. They were never people who asked for global attention. They simply became the focus of it. That vulnerability is why the story now feels so urgent. Not because viewers need another update, but because the family deserves stability. Real stability, not temporary attention, not another wave of internet arguments. Something quieter, something structured, something protective. When people say someone needs the courage to save the Whittakers, they often imagine a hero, one person stepping forward to solve everything. But the truth is rarely that dramatic. Real protection usually comes through systems, through guardianship, through legal oversight, through social services designed to protect vulnerable adults when circumstances become complicated. Those systems are not perfect, but they exist to prevent situations exactly like this from spiraling further. They create accountability. They create documentation. They create a process where decisions are made carefully instead of emotionally. And that may be the most important lesson the Whittaker story leaves behind. Sometimes the most courageous thing a person can do is step back. Not step forward. Step back so the right structures can protect the people who need it most. The internet often celebrates dramatic heroes, but real care often happens quietly. A social worker arranging medical appointments. A legal guardian ensuring finances are protected. A judge reviewing evidence before making decisions that affect someone's life. These roles rarely go viral, but they matter, because at the end of the day, the goal should never be controlling the Whittaker story. The goal should be protecting the Whittaker family, making sure Timmy receives the care he needs, making sure Lorraine's voice is respected, making sure the family's dignity remains intact, and making sure that no one, regardless of their intentions, can exploit their situation again. The future of the Whittakers may never return to the quiet life they once had. Too many people know their story now. But the next chapter does not have to be defined by chaos. It can be defined by stability, by responsible oversight, by people who genuinely care more about the family's well-being than about recognition. Because the real measure of courage in this situation isn't who talks the loudest. It's who is willing to protect a vulnerable family without asking for the spotlight in return. And perhaps that is the answer to the question many people have been asking all along. Who has the courage to save the Whittakers? Maybe the real answer is this. The people who truly help them will probably never make a video about it. But their work will matter far more than any headline ever could. Thank you for watching this video. Click here to watch another video that might interest you.